Community Unity Now, the D-Tycoon Show. This is Bill Morton, President of the Rogers Park Chamber of Commerce. I am Trudy Leong, Administrator at the Rogers Park Chamber of Commerce. Our very special guest today is Max Bever. He's the Director of Public Relations at the Chicago Board of Election Commissioners. Welcome, Max.
Thank you for the invite.
Welcome. So happy to have you here today. We have so much to unpack. I'll let Trudy start with the opening question, but we have so much, more than 27 minutes worth.
Well, Max, first of all, there are the various different boards of election commissioners. There's the Illinois, there's Chicago, and then there's Cook County. So what is the Chicago Board of Election Commissioners? How do you impact the people of Chicago voters?
Thanks, Trudy. I think that's a great question to start on because this can often get very confusing for voters. We're not like a lot of other states where there's one central elected official, like a Secretary of State, that oversees the elections. We actually have over 100 separate election authorities across our state, and majority of those act independently. So while there is the Illinois State Board of Elections, they're not counting the ballots for anybody else. They are a state agency that oversees our elections, makes sure that all those numbers are adding up correctly, giving resources to the rest of election authorities across the state. But every different jurisdiction and county has their own way of conducting elections. So at the city of Chicago, they're covered by the Chicago Board of Election Commissioners. This dates all the way back to 1886. It was created by referendum, a question that was given to voters that said, hey, should we get the Board of Elections outside of City Hall control? The voters said yes, and we've been an independent commission ever since. It's under 3 commissioners that are appointed by the Chief Judge of the Circuit Court of Chicago, so it's not an elected office, so you're never going to see one of our commissioners on the ballot. But we cover everybody within the city of Chicago. That's nearly 1.6 million registered voters. And we conduct all the election equipment and the elections within the city of Chicago. So if you've got your ID and it says Chicago on it, then you're a Chicago voter and you should come to us at the Chicago Board of Elections. But we know that sometimes that's often confusing because then you've got the rest of Cook County, you've got the suburban Cook County. They're having their election season right now. That's underneath the Cook County Clerk's office. So you see a lot of different clerks and recorders throughout this state that oversee elections. But in Chicago, we have an independent commission underneath our commissioners, and that's how this system is set up.
What is the term for the commissioners?
They are a board commissioner. Mm-hmm. They are appointed to a 3-year term by our chief judge, and they have different roles. So we are under our chairwoman, Maricel Hernandez, and our other 2 commissioners are June Brown and William Cressy. Under rules, we have to have 2 that identify as a Democrat and 1 that identifies as a Republican. That's just based off the dominance of the party. So that is a part of the process too. Otherwise, they are appointed for their qualifications. A majority of them are lawyers, but they're not an elected official. And so they don't raise money, they don't appear on the ballot, and they aren't influenced by any campaigns that way.
So one is Republican, one is Democrat, then what's number 3?
That would be another Democrat at this point, just based off of the makeup of the city.
So you mentioned the Cook County Clerk's office. I worked for the Cook County Clerk's office for a period of time, maybe around 2008. So how do you work with the Chicago Clerk's office?
So we have, we are directly within the city for Chicago, and then there's the larger suburban Cook County. We are in the same building, but we don't have any overlap when it comes to our voters. But when it comes to, petition season, when it comes to the electoral board, that's how our candidates get on the ballot. We do share a lot of those duties when it comes to hearing different candidates' petitions or objections. We share those duties between ourselves. Otherwise, we've got our own equipment, we've got our own staff, and we're servicing those voters directly within the city of Chicago versus suburban Cook County that are overseen by the clerk's office.
So the clerk's office in Cook County, clerk's office, we made sure we validated voters with an Oracle machine back then. We had the Sequoia voting machines, and we counted the votes, and we made sure that the rules were applied, and the election judges called us in. So how is that different from what you're doing?
It's very similar. We have a lot of voters within Northern Illinois here. So we've got about 1.6 million registered voters within the city of Chicago. Pretty similar numbers for suburban Cook County. I think it's around 1.5. So rather than have one office take 3 million voters, the system was set up this way. And again, we were created by a referendum to be an independent council that's overseen by an elected official, but we do share a lot of duties, similar type of duties. We just do it for the city, for Chicago Board of Elections.
There are investigators. Bill and I are election judges have been for a long time. And every election, there are the various investigators that come in. So could you describe to us who those investigators are under, and then do any have to report back to the Chicago Board of Election Commissioners?
Mm-hmm. Sure thing. I love talking about poll workers. This is really one of the biggest jobs that election officials have to do before each election. You know, the city of Chicago used to be set up very differently. The election judges, you know, let's say even 30 years ago, were mostly coming in from what we call committee people. These are the ward committee people, both Democrats and Republicans. Back during the Daily Machine era, most of the judges were coming directly from these elected officials. That's not the case anymore. Really, it's more of the Board of Elections' duty to get all of those poll workers. So thank you for your service. We appreciate it. We need poll workers every single election and election judges. It's getting to be a bigger challenge. It doesn't pay very well. It's a very long day. And it's something where we don't blame people when they wake up at 3 a.m. that day and say, you know what, maybe this isn't for me. But that means we always have to over-prepare, and we always have to over-hire when it comes to our election judges. Now, in the city of Chicago, we're set up with a few different roles when it comes to our polling places. There are election judges. Those are the people that are checking you into the polls. Those are the people that are helping you with any questions on the ballot, and then also helping you get that into the ballot counter and give you your I voted sticker at the end of the day. Then each precinct has what we call an election coordinator. They're more of our tech-driven person. They're there to help troubleshoot, just oversee the election judges and help in any way. And then what you mentioned, we have what's called an investigator, a polling place investigator in the city of Chicago. We have this role because we don't want to overdo an amount of law enforcement presence, amount of security at the polling places. Most of our polling places are in public buildings. They're at our parks, they're at our schools, they're at our libraries. These are places that come with their own layers of security, but we also know that voters don't generally want to see 4 or 5 police officers or maybe an armed guard as they're heading into a polling place. Mm-hmm. So what we have is a system of about 400 to 450 polling place investigators that we hire ahead of every election day. The majority of these are retired law enforcement. Many of them are off duty. They've worked for the Chicago Police Department, the Sheriff's Office. They've been working for the Department of Corrections, but they have some experience in law enforcement. And they're there on hand, and they're assigned a number of precincts to be on call. So they're visiting them throughout the day, but they're also just making sure everything is safe, orderly, that there's no issues going on. And if there is a call, or if they're present and there's something that's happening, say there's a candidate or a campaign that is trying to campaign within that no campaign zone, or a voter that really doesn't like waiting in line, they're there to help de-escalate the situation, to help respond to it. And if need be, that's often when 911 is called or law enforcement's called. Thankfully, that's very rare. Even in a city like Chicago, our voters are very dedicated, they're very calm, they're very patient with each other. Even with our last presidential election that saw a lot of people come out, and we saw a lot of lines at our early voting places. We didn't run into too many issues, but we do have to prepare for the worst. And I think that's just something that we have to be more cognizant of moving towards the future, is just making sure that our polling places are safe, they have the security that they need, but they don't feel over-secure, or they don't feel over-militarized. And that's the role of our investigators.
And then there's also the state's attorney. So is that from Cook County State's Attorney, or is that the Illinois State's Attorney that comes in to investigate, the one with the trench coats?
That's our Cook County State's Attorney. So we and also the Cook County Clerk's office often work closely with the State's Attorney when it comes to complaints and calls, when it comes to either, say, campaign violations. Somebody's got an issue where they might consider, like, I think that this was fraud, or I think that this candidate was engaging in fraud. This is something that we'll turn over to the State's Attorney's office. They have a dedicated phone line. They have dedicated people who work on elections related to that. But thankfully, that's something that's also very rare and uncommon. But it is something that we have to prepare for ahead of each time. The state's attorney's office and many officials across the country take election violations very seriously. So if you're somebody who thinks that they can threaten a polling place or call in a bomb threat, that's where you're going, straight to the state's attorney's office, and they can press charges. Again, very rare, but this is the layer of security that's in place for that.
Yeah, there's always something for us to learn. About 2 elections ago, I think, a former alderman came in and he said that he was voting for his wife as well. And then I processed him, and then later I thought about it, and maybe he's not supposed to do that. So I asked around, and he's not supposed to do that.
Well, I mean, these are the type of complaints and issues that the state's attorneys do deal with. But, anyone that has any of those questions, that's what's happening on Election Day. So every Election Day, as Chicago Board of Elections, we put together what we call Election Central. And it is a team of lawyers, it is a team of translators, it is a team of people that are dedicated taking the calls, not just from our voters and constituents, but from those election judges and people on site. So any issue can be troubleshooted in real time. They have that question, they call us, and we have a response for them. So there's nobody that can really kind of try and be like, you know what, I'm going to try to get away with something today. There is that line, and our election judges are trained, and people like you, to make sure they're following up on any type of questions or complaints related to that.
Wow, thank you for that. I always thought that Election Central was for the election judges. I didn't know that the public could call in as well, because whenever I call in, there's always a lack of pens, a lack of this and that.
There's always a little issue.
It's a very busy day. And I think, one of the things at the board is that we're always trying to get into the 21st century, which is something funny to say that we're already a quarter of the way through this century. But that's just how elections have worked for so long. They've been intentionally old-fashioned because, well, that's a way to provide a layer of security. If you don't have computers, then there's no way for people to be able to deal with that. However, we know that we have to get into the future and meet voters where they're at. So getting, more up-to-date voter technology. We were just having this discussion coming in here, but something that has really changed over the last decade is Chicago voters' experience and their trust of our touchscreen voting machines. So really, up until almost 15 years ago, even 10 years ago, we were still seeing a vast majority of our voters only showing up on Election Day, and they were choosing to vote only that paper ballot at their precinct. But a lot has changed over the last decade when it comes to the Illinois Election Code. We now have same-day registration. We now have vote centers that are open on Election Day where any voter can go to any of those locations in the city rather than just your assigned precinct polling place. So a lot of these voting habits are finally catching up with the future as well. And that's something that we are ultimately trying to catch up to.
So would we benefit from more electronic polling places?
I'm glad that you asked this question because this is one of the big conversations of the day. Whether the term be vote center, a universal vote center, early voting site that's open on Election Day, or a universal polling place, the intent is the same, which is that it is a polling place with only electronic voting machines that any voter can go to no matter where you are in the city. Right now in the city of Chicago, we've got a hybrid system. All of our early voting sites, so that month before Election Day, either our super site downtown or the 50 ward centers, the 2 weeks before Election Day, they're all what we call vote anywhere, which means that you can go to any of those locations and use any of those machines. Because when you're checking into the poll book, they're getting your ward, they're getting your precinct, they're getting your split precinct information, they're handing you that card, and that's what you plug into the machine. Then we have Election Day, which is that you have to either go to your assigned precinct polling place. So that's that piece of mail that you get from us that tells you where it's at. You can go to chicagoelections.gov, find your precinct polling place, or now you can use one of those 50 open vote centers in any of those locations. Otherwise, you can't just show up to any polling place in the city. So if you're in the 49th ward, you can't just say, well, I'm closer over to the 35th ward. I hear this library's open, and you just can't go there. I think we're looking to examples across the state of how this is being expanded. McHenry County recently went to all of its locations being vote anywhere. The difference is that you need more voting machines. And right now we just have a limited number in Chicago that we are budgeted for. So those are used for our early voting sites. And right now all of our precinct polling places just have one. That's something that we'd like to expand. And we'd love to hear from people, either to take our online survey, which is ongoing right now, or our upcoming voter forum, share your feedback, because we know that early voting and our touchscreen machines are becoming more popular. And it's a way that, it's a machine that's already made for our voters. It's made for our voters with disabilities. It's made for blind voters. It's made for deaf voters. It's got that equipment. And it also has 13 different languages as well. Whether English is not your first language, you have many different options using these touchscreen machines. So it's really a good value for what's available. But otherwise, what we have is our precinct system, which is that paper ballot that you had it. That's never going to go away, I think, in Chicago. That's still going to be available on Election Day, paper ballots for a very, very long time. But the thing about our touchscreen machines is that it's also a paper ballot system. Yes, you are using that touchscreen, but that spits a paper ballot out for you at the end. That's ultimately what you are putting into the ballot counter. You can review all of your choices, and there's always a paper trail, too. We feel like that's an important protection that our electronic voting machines have at this point, is that it's not online voting. It still spits out a paper ballot, and that's ultimately what's counted in our audit or any type of recounts that come in the future. It's very important to have that paper ballot trail.
The accountability, I remember reading the tapes. There were 2 tapes, and then we made sure we read one. This voted for this, that this many votes this way. And it's very important to actually have that locked up. So it's not only digital, because there's a trust issue with that sometimes.
Yeah. Well, there's ease of voting, which I think that the state of Illinois is head and shoulders above a lot of our neighbors around here. I think we look to our neighbors in Wisconsin, we look to our neighbors in Michigan and Indiana. There's been more restrictions that have been placed on voting. Illinois has really gone the opposite direction. It's made it easier for voters than ever. Now, the thing about that is that there really is no excuse then to vote. Since we have same-day registration, which that you can even get registered to vote on Election Day as long as you've got 2 pieces of ID, ultimately, it's made it easier than ever for a voter to get that done and to be a registered voter in this state. On the other part is that now we have so many options for people, it can somewhat be overwhelming. But no matter which way you love to vote, there's an easy way to do it now. And it really splits into 3 different ways. You can either early vote the month before Election Day, you can vote on Election Day at your precinct polling place or at a vote center, or what's really been expanded in Illinois over the past few years and since the pandemic is voting by mail. And that's something that's been really popular with people who are under the age of 40. I think, when I first started this job 4 years ago, there's certain assumptions, or what it used to be with voting by mail is that maybe this is more attractive to seniors, maybe this is more attractive to voters with disabilities or somebody who needs to stay at home or have a safe environment at home. But it turns out that voting by mail is just very popular with a lot of millennials and a lot of people now under the age of 30, because you get that ballot ahead of time, you have all the time to do it at your kitchen table. And what we have in Chicago that's becoming more popular than ever is our drop box system. In fact, this last presidential election, we saw over 52% of our vote by mail voters choose to use a drop box rather than do it through the mail. And that's something that we can understand. USPS, they've got issues. They're a great partner, but there's more delays than ever. And there's a little bit of a trust value, especially if you're turning in that ballot a little bit closer to Election Day. We urge our vote by mail voters, hey, if you can make it out to one of our early voting sites, or if you can make it downtown, all you can do is just drop that off. You sign everything on there and drop that off. And I think that we convert new vote by mail voters every election. The people who are in those lines, especially the weekend before Election Day at our early voting sites, maybe they've been in that line for an hour, they're feeling a bit grumpy, and then they see a vote by mail voter, get to there, put that into a drop box, and then leave. I think that those are the people who look up the vote by mail application after that election.
And after you do the Dropbox option, or before you actually drop it, you could spoil it if you change your mind.
That is true. So if you choose to vote by mail and you have that ballot, you can still choose to vote in person. All you got to do is take that ballot with you. And if you lost that ballot or it got damaged or you forgot to bring it with you, there's still an option to vote. So again, we have a very strong safety net system in the state of Illinois for voters, and that it's been easier to vote than ever.
I'd like to talk about assisted voting. When we were election judges, we would send a Republican and a Democrat to the poll to help somebody, to assist somebody. How about in nursing homes? Is that the same all the time? And how can we be assured that it's the actual voter voting.
I'm glad you brought this up. This is often, a topic of conversation that has a lot of misinformation and disinformation around it. And it's really split up into two different forms. There's curbside voting on Election Day. You can always make that request. We have a full-time curbside voting system with a bell at our downtown super site. But if you're a voter with disabilities and you want to go to your precinct polling place and it is not 100% accessible, we're working there. We are getting there. Right now we have a 3-tier system for our polling places. They either identify it as fully ADA accessible, a medium, which means that something temporary has been taken care of that day and somebody can get in, or low to no, which means that maybe that school still has steps or there's something that is blocking full access. You can request, no matter the situation, curbside voting at that location. And that's where an election judge of both parties are going to come out, bring that ballot to you. They're going to stay with you until that ballot's completed. They're going to both go in to make sure that that's properly cast and put into the system. Now, when it comes to our nursing homes, they're not open on Election Day. So what we have is dedicated early voting times for our election judges to stop by. For our nursing homes, too, we try to work with that nursing home, if they have opted in, to pick 2 separate weekends where they, judges, will come and be present while those ballots are being filled out. Now, that is the important part. Those judges are present and they are seeing those voters actually make those choices. The big thing when the laws came to changing that was that we just want to make sure that there isn't somebody there that's just handing off a big style of backs and said, like, sure, all of our residents voted this way.
Correct.
That there are election judges of both parties present watching this happen. And so that's where also voting by mail for these nursing homes is often discouraged or is stopped so they can have this live process. There are different ways kind of around that, or if like that voter really wants to vote by mail. But this is another protection that the law put in place, that you can't just have all of your residents get vote by mail and then mail those back. So we do have election judges that are present during that early voting period at our nursing homes. Now, those ballots are counted a little bit later in the process. They are taken back. They are collected like vote by mail ballots. And they're ultimately scanned at a later date during the counting period.
But they still count.
But they still count. And it's a much cleaner system that way. It's much more organized. And it's something that can be much more transparent and a lot of our nursing home voters can trust in making sure that their ballots are getting into the hands of election judges and getting back to the board and counted appropriately.
So each of these nursing homes or group homes, they have different specific dates that you arrange with the facilities that are separate from early voting or election day voting.
That is right. And so that they'll be present, they'll collect those ballots, and they'll bring them back, and they're put under lock and key ultimately until they can be scanned at a later date. Somewhat similar to what we do at Cook County Jail. So in the state of Illinois, you can continue to vote unless you are actively serving a sentence. So we have a lot of people what's called in pre-trial detention. This is something that we also do with the Cook County Clerk's office, but we go to Cook County Jail, overseen by the Sheriff's Office, for 2 full weekends of early voting at the jails. And we often see hundreds of people each weekend, over 1,000. Generally, people vote every single time. That precinct in the city often is one of our highest voting precincts because it involves a lot of the voters from that jail. But they're not all just voting from that precinct. Many people have been registered to vote beforehand. They are getting their appropriate ballot for where they have lived outside of that.
So a big question about this, just to ask this right away. Returning citizens, are they allowed to vote in the state of Illinois?
They are. So as long as you are not actively serving your sentence in jail, you have your voting rights restored. And thankfully there was a law passed that educates voters. They are handed a packet. They are told by the Cook County Sheriff's Office that their voting rights have been restored. But this still takes a lot of community work. This is something that we need to remind voters and make sure that they feel comfortable. You know, in this environment where a lot of voters aren't feeling comfortable for a lot of myriad reasons, this is something that we try to say or really put a lot of effort into communicating to returning citizens is you have the right to vote. Please use your right to vote. You can use your voice.
Speaking of paper trail and vote by mail, a lot of our voters that vote by in person, they're so concerned that their vote is going to count. So if they vote by mail, do they have their paper trail? Do they know that it's been counted? Except for later, they would look and see if they have voted on that day. The voter the worksheets will indicate in what election they have voted. But Do you ever have people that say, oh, I have voted, but it's indicated that I have not voted?
This is a very good question, and this is where we love our vote by mail voters, but every single year, every single election, we try to remind them to get that ballot back to us as soon as possible. Because what we have going on right before Election Day is often we're just inundated with a lot of vote by mail ballots right before Election Day, on Election Day. And in the state of Illinois, there's a 2-week counting period. As long as that ballot has been properly postmarked for Election Day, this is a lot of our military and overseas voters that's coming in the week after Election Day. As long as that's still properly postmarked, it's going to be counted. But we have a lot of ballots to count right around Election Day and immediately after. So we're talking tens of thousands of vote-by-mail ballots. This is often when people have questions, which is, hey, I returned that the day before Election Day. I returned my vote-by-mail ballot on Election Day. What's up? Sometimes it takes that time to get them processed because it is not an immediate process. Vote by mail is one of the safest ways to vote in Illinois because there's so many different layers of security and laws that are protecting it. So first of all, you got to sign that ballot. You got to return it back to us. That's got to be scanned initially. Then it's got to be opened. And then it's got to have presence of both parties, election judges, opening that, looking at the ballot, making sure that it's not damaged. And then they're going to insert it. So it's a very secure process, but it takes a long time. So we often have a lot of voters that are just asking us ultimately. Yeah, I know
So,
we're getting close
yeah,
to time.
we
But
are
if you
on
have any
time.
questions, go to chicagoelections.gov. You can see the tracking of your vote by mail ballot if you go to your voter information.
That's important to know.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Max Brewer of the Chicago Board of Election Commissioners. This is Bill Morton, President of the Rogers Park Chamber of Commerce. I am Trudy Leong, Administrator of the Rogers Park Chamber of Commerce. Thank you so much for joining us on Community Unity Now, the D Tycoon Show, and we will see you